Hey, what's up, world? It's Patrick Lovell coming to you at 10:14 a.m. on August 3rd, 2022. And I feel compelled in a way that I was going to try to put on the back burner, and try to take a break and kind of reconfigure my mind. And I am. But somebody important to me behind this project asked that I might comment on a specific situation that seems to be relevant to a whole lot of other situations. And so I thought I'd take the time to do it also in context to a good buddy of mine, Kelly Anderson. I just found out yesterday passed away. And, it was a sudden and tragic loss. He apparently died kayaking up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And so, I don't know, just kind of thinking about, how fragile life is and how immediate things can happen and how we have to look at our own lives in context of the big picture of what these truth bombs are that I'm dropping on you. Because you never know when you're going to be here, or God hits the eject button on you. But to me, it's all about the sanctity of life and dignity and what's important in a value structure and what our principles are that actually define who we are and what create the value that we contribute to this world and society while we're here on this incredible planet in the vast infinity of space, right? So, three things particularly on my mind in context to, what I continue to try to drive home. And I try to do everything I can possibly do to find that magic key that's going to unlock your brain to be able to become a force with us to overcome the madness of what we're all in the midst of. So it's like the best of times and the worst of times. You remember that from the wonderful novel about the revolution in France, right? And for me, technology in its own right is magnificent. I can get anything I want to explore and find in all of the arenas that are interesting to me in a split second at the drop of a dime by just, doing a search. That's what we do, right? And so ultimately, the vastness of America, of human history and access to technology and theory and everything else is there for the taking, as is, unfortunately, insane misinformation and really incredibly horrible things that play out on a daily basis. And that's kind of that's the give and take. That's the two sides of the coin. That's life itself. That's yin and yang. I mean, to me, it's the absolute expression of humanity and everything that constitutes life in the essence of the dark side and the light side, right? So, three things are happening concurrently right now that really paint the picture so incredibly clearly of what it is that I'm trying to hopefully not only get your attention, but get your soul, your passion, your commitment. Because if we don't break through the madness, it will continue to get worse, and we have to defeat the villain of evil that constitutes all of these things that I've been dropping on you. So first and foremost, there's a trial down in Austin, Texas, that features the Sandy Hook families, I think 10 of them, who lost their children in that violent, insane episode back in 2012. And they are suing Alex Jones. Alex Jones being InfoWars, the guy who's always blasting about conspiracy. And sometimes and I've listened to Alex off and on throughout the years, mostly, with a laugh, because I know he's a little bit unhinged. But, there's times where I've seen things that he said that, were close to the mark, quite frankly. And then he ended up with this huge audience. But then there's things that he's done that are absolutely insane and borders on criminal. And this gets into this notion of free speech and access and who's telling what and when and how. And I've learned a lot over the course of the last, let's call it 2 years. Like, for example, Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson were sued for libel, and both made the case. Now, they're completely on different sides of ideological spectrum, but both found themselves in courtrooms, or at least the networks, being sued for libel. And ultimately, the argument was their entertainment. So think about that every time that you tune in to a freaking punk ass, both of them, quite frankly, because they both spin a yarn based on certain things that are just going to be specific to their catch-all audience, and then they whitewash everything else. So in either case, it's either direct deception or some sort of configuration that's not giving you the whole picture, which is obfuscation, which is a different degree of deception. So in the case of Alex Jones, he may really be on the hook for being sued, I think, for $100 million, maybe more. I think that InfoWars apparently brought in over $150 million over the last decade, much of it attributed to these, what are they called? The people that believe the end of the world, preppers, right? That are coming. And the whole thing configuration with the Sandy Hook was that, Alex Jones made it out to be some government conspiracy to basically try to play on people's emotions so that they could take away your Second Amendment rights. First of all, that's fucking insane. Children got fucking murdered, and Alex Jones is acting as if they're making it up. Imagine you losing your child to some fucking idiot teenager who's played his life of video games and lived in a dark hole and fantasies, and then got military grade firearms to go attack children. I mean, the stupidity and the insanity, but the tragedy is absolutely insanely real. So here we are with a situation where the families are suing and they have to relive this experience over and over and over. And the event itself took place back in 2012, and now it's 22, and you can see how long the machine of justice, if there is justice, gets moved into a position to make some things happen. Okay, so let's put that in a bucket for a moment, right? Okay, the second that came out, that I chimed in on pretty passionately last week were the 9/11 families that were broadcasting Trump and his hosting of the Live Tour, funded by the Saudis, that I've been really, really pissed off about. And the 9/11 families got some media attention. They called a spade a spade. They actually produced a 30-second spot, and they're saying that the United States government knew that there was material support provided by the Saudi royal family to the terrorist cells that actually conducted 9/11, that we never got to the bottom of it. And so their whole thing, to be honest with you, is they're suing the government of Saudi Arabia. Good for them. That's great. They're keeping it alive, and they're the only ones that can actually talk about this. And I saw brief moments where there were some truths in mainstream media, believe it or not, where people started talking about the Saudis outside of the scope of this guy, Khashoggi, whom many of you know, was murdered by MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi, and then he was cut up with a bone saw into like 1,000 pieces so they could cover it up. Anyway, he ends up getting busted. Biden goes and meets and kisses the ring of the fucking Saudis, because Saudi, as some of you may know and many of you probably don't know, Saudi is this insane religious fascist state that basically props up the royal family so that the West and the world can get its oil. Okay, and they trade in dollars, and there's this huge composite, economic sort of militaristic sort of connection. And as it turns out, the UK, United Kingdom, and Americans, and probably behind the scenes Israelis to some degree, help the Saudis because they spend a shit ton of money to help them train their police, give them military arms, all sorts of sophisticated military equipment, and probably intelligence stuff, so that they can maintain their power through this theocracy that has these mullah, Wahhabi-trained religious police that go out and beat the fuck out of everybody in their country or throw them in prison, and then they behead them, right? I mean, the freedoms that we have in the United States, everybody, online, the kind of stuff that I'm doing right now, I'd be beheaded in prison and tortured in a nanosecond. And they do it without apology, and they do it without anybody challenging them, because all of the middle players get a shit ton of money for this fucking relationship that keeps us on oil, that backstops the dollar, and then continues to contribute to this freaking global emissions that we've had the technology and the science that tells us exactly what's going to happen with global warming, and it happens all over, or we'll call it climate change. But, look at what's happening in Kentucky and all of the wildfires. I mean, this is something that happens year after year. We start talking about this, and the weather gets hotter and hotter and worse, and all of these types of things come together. But all of it, we have the technology to change this, and we know that the Saudis actually contributed heavily to allowing 9/11 to happen. My theory is simply that bin Laden and his cohorts, and we got, Zawahri this week, in a targeted drone strike. Good for us for freaking taking them out, and Biden and everything else. And the bottom line is, it took 20 years to do it. He was in Afghanistan on a fucking balcony. We left Afghanistan, and there he is, and the Taliban supporting him, and boom, we fragged him. Does that actually, handle, the scourge of tourism right now? Terrorism? No. And then, to go back to my the biggest villainous woman that exists in cable news, Rachel Maddow, responds to this information because all she is the communication director for the Democratic Party. She's responding to, Donald Trump. She doesn't even mention the 9/11 families and what they're talking about and everything else that, reveal that the Saudis actually made this happen. What she says is that Donald Trump, her nemesis, says over the weekend, hey, everyone, we never got to the bottom of 9/11. And he says that with a swarmy look on his face, like, hey, we can do whatever we want because nobody ever got to the bottom. And then she uses that as a lead-in to say, oh, we just got to the bottom of 9/11 by assassinating the number 2 guy at al-Qaeda, al-Zawahri. And that's a difficult name to pronounce, but, he's been around for, I don't know, fucking decades. The guy's from Egypt. He wasn't even Saudi. Bottom line is, though, he was very influential on bin Laden and, the ideology and all of the terrorist activities. He was a smart guy. He was a surgeon, but we got him. And that's great. Hallelujah for the CIA for doing that. But does that actually resolve 9/11? Fuck no, it doesn't. Okay? So now you got the families of 9/11 trying to get some sort of recompense, with the Saudis, and good for them. I hope they do one day. And I hope that somehow all of this stuff translates. And then let's see, what was the fourth? Oh, yeah, this is probably the most important one because this is why I did this. So my friend Becky, who is the angel that creates all of these videos on TikTok, asked me to talk about this briefly. And I don't know the story inside and out, but just enough of it to try to make this parallel. So there's this massive lawsuit based on Camp LeJeune where poisoned and toxic water basically gave all sorts of Marine service members horrific outcomes over the years, cancer and stuff that could have been prevented and they knew it, okay? And, and so now there's, alongside Jon Stewart, with all of the stuff with the veterans budgets to try to help these guys with, I can't remember what the terminology was, but there was like this major, fire heat, something or other in different combat that they wanted to get, some sort of medical assistance for, which required additional budget and everything else. And the point was that the Republicans fucking blocked this, and Jon Stewart went absolutely apeshit, started calling a spade, and called Ted Cruz the fucking maggot that he is. Next thing you know, Congress ended up actually approving, after all the Republicans approved it initially and then went against this additional, budget for veterans, and they finally got it because, the efforts of Jon Stewart, to create such a kind of a cathartic, like, what the fuck? And so they put some political pressure and they got the deal done, or at least I think most of what they wanted to get done. But in the context of this Camp LeJeune lawsuit, there were literally families who lost, their family members to cancer and all sorts of horrible outcomes because the water was poisoned, and that the base knew it, and the United States government knew it, and they covered it up. Okay, so you see some parallels here. So here's where I'm coming from. Okay, so do I hope that the families of Sandy Hook find some recompense from Alex Jones and maybe even bankrupt them? Yeah, I would like to see that. But does that solve the problem of what murdered their children? No, not even remotely, okay, first and foremost. Second, with the 9/11 families and them going after Saudi and all the things that constitute all of these things that I just mentioned, and there's so much more that we could talk about, but I want to talk for freaking days and hours and months or whatever. I just want to just make this point to you that does that bring their family members back? Did that solve the problem of terrorism? Or, because remember after 9/11, we're going to go after all of these countries that, support terrorism, and we're going to, like the Wild West, wanted dead or alive, all that kind of shit. You know what? It never panned out that way because we fucking played ball with the guys who were the ultimate supporters of terrorism. Monetarily, all the assets that Saudi had, and they do that to protect their own power. They want to export the Wahhabism and all of these guys to create this control where they pay everybody off on the inside so that they can have all the money and the natural resources of oil in the Saudi, in the kingdom, while they destroy everybody else. In fact, I just happened to watch this courageous documentary that's on Netflix that everybody should watch. Inside the Kingdom of Saudi, I think it is, or I can't remember the name of it. Damn it, it's on Netflix, and I can't believe it showed up there. It's made by a UK production crew out of ITN, and I think because there was a lot of controversy over Saudi having an interest in Netflix, and there was a Brian Fogel documentary on Khashoggi that never made it on, but somehow this made it on. Not a lot of fanfare, but if you watch it, you get to see how this whole Saudi engine works, and man, you would not believe the poverty in Saudi Arabia and how they literally just beat down women in the streets publicly, physically. Anybody could walk up and just beat the living crap out of a woman anyhow, any way they want. And that's just how this whole thing works with the religious theocracy. And if you want to listen to music and if you want to like be a little bit critical of the Saudi regime, they throw you in fucking prison and murder you, behead you in front of everybody else. These guys are relentless. And how are they able to do that? Us. We give them the tools to do it. Why? Because supposedly we have to have the oil backstopping the dollar and the geopolitics that comes with it and everything else, which I'm telling you, we have all of the resources. First, we produce more oil and gas than anybody in the world, from what I understand. So I can't quite figure it out outside of the geopolitics. But B, we could transition for a tiny fraction of the amount of money that we have to spend, propping up this fucking bullshit for people, by the way. And so let's think about how this works. And here's a complete parallel, right? So the gun manufacturers that never want to end the type of stuff that lead to Sandy Hook or Uvalde and everything else, those guys are making fucking bank. They make shit tons of money on a bunch of pretzel logic kind of bullshit, because having a gun is a right? A right for what? Well, to be able to actually prevent tyranny in the United States. So in context, everything I'm talking about with the Saudis makes a lot of sense. But here's reality. We live in 2022. You think a bunch of dudes, even with military grade weapons, that could actually, many of them through white supremacist groups who have incredible training in the military and police actually create militias around the world, even have a tiny chance at defeating the United States military if they decided they wanted to overthrow the government because of tyranny. Not a fucking fat chance if the military wanted to come down on it. The only thing the insurrection was able to pull off in a very big way with its coup d'etat, organized by the billionaires that I've been telling you about the whole time, that used a whole bunch of white supremacists on the front lines that actually had military experience and police experience. The whole situation there is they got the goddamn National Guard and military to sit on the sidelines because President Trump was able to do that. Okay, as were the guys on the inside. I mean, that's the conspiracy itself, to overthrow the government, a fair and legitimate election, to steal it. That's exactly what they did. So then they flip the script and they say all this other bullshit, but that's where we are. And our government hasn't even been able to take down Trump for the obvious stuff within the insurrection, let alone his business practices, throughout the entirety of his career, which is nothing but a control fraud going back decades. So now I'm kind of meandering a little bit, but I got to bring it back to the biggest point of all. So whether it's Camp LeJeune trying to sue the military to get, some sort of recompense for the veterans that, came down with cancer after the fact so that their family can get some sort of payoff even though they lost their family members. Or, for example, Jon Stewart trying to get the budget for the veterans that need it. And, in that context, we can spend so much freaking money on war. Okay. Have you ever been to, Chevy Chase, Maryland? I have. There's rich estates all over the fucking countryside, which are absolutely gorgeous. And what I learned when I was taking a tour through there is that most of them are military contractors or in on the lobbying affairs of the military industrial state. They make millions. Do you know how many trillions of dollars that disappeared in Afghanistan and probably Iraq? I remember hearing stories that we spent beyond exorbitant amounts of money in those countries to pay off warlords to kind of keep the peace a little bit while we maintain the war, okay? Meanwhile, Jon Stewart's begging for, what are we talking about? I can't remember the exact figure. I want to say it was like $4 billion to help veterans. So we can spend infinite amount of money sending people into harm's way and covering up stuff while they're at our camps. And we can't spend the money or find the money to do that, but we can find money all day long to create insane wars for the wrong reason and pay off the wrong guys to do it. Get it? And then what about, like I said, the gun manufacturers and the Saudi? So here's my point about all of this stuff. It's fucking corruption rules the fucking country that you think is a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate. I'm a producer, an investigative journalist. I put together a 5-hour revelation that is $29 trillion bigger than Watergate, and that's not hyperbole. The truth is there. So Wall Street, I'm talking about gun manufacturers, the military industrial complex, and oil. Those are all big parts of the situation, problem, and all of them have a solution. But the biggest of them all is finance, Wall Street, the fuel that maintains everything that I'm talking about and then some. And so in the 2008 great financial crisis, you got to think of it like this. 9/11, just imagine the whole thing's an inside job, or in context to allowing it to happen. I don't want to talk about the what's it called, the truthers theories and all that kind of stuff. That's separate. It's an intelligence failure. The planes, equipped with 15 out of 19, hijackers from Saudi Arabia, run into the Twin Towers. They collapse. 3,000 people approximately dead on that day, and now we have millions and trillions of dollars spent, millions of people lost cents and trillions of dollars spent. Okay, so that's its own place. The gun manufacturing is another. I think I read something along the lines of 30,000 people a year get killed from gun violence. It's fucking insane, and a lot of it from suicide. Okay, so that's another one. But yet the gun manufacturers make trillions, billions of dollars. Okay, and then Wall Street. Okay, to put it all into perspective, Wall Street sets up both homeowners, and probably the biggest example of the American dream is home ownership, and that's how you get to the middle class, if you can afford it and sustain it, and that's the whole idea of finance. But we created all of these complicated scenarios and roadways to basically create an incredible deceptive pipeline of criminal activity that served the CEOs, where they made billions on a bunch of fraud on the way in the pipeline going up to 2008, and when the whole thing collapsed, they, just like the Twin Towers coming down on the American middle class, just basically destroyed tens of millions of people. Not just people that were in homes, but everybody with affiliated work in those particular arenas, as well as, of course, pensioners around the world and municipalities and everything else. It was, if 9/11 was terrorism, this is financial terrorism. And they got away with $29 trillion. I think fucking NASA's budget, I should look it up right now. It's like 45 billion, maybe. I think it's 45 billion for NASA. Fuck it. You know what? While I'm here, I'm just going to look, because I can do that. And hopefully you're paying attention and we don't lose my. So NASA's budget for 2022 is 24 billion. Okay, so I was close. I said 25 billion. So 25 billion. Discover the answers of the fucking universe. Okay, and we gave Wall Street, for burying tens of million people, $29 trillion. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. And then we've given them 30 trillion cents. That's on the low side. And they've got control of everything. So if it's Rachel Maddow saying, hey, we got justice because we fragged al-Zawahri and now 9/11 is a closed book. Fuck you, Rachel Maddow. That's not even remotely what the fuck's going on. And then the insurrection and everything that's going on. You focus on Trump versus everything else that we talked about. Not to mention, it's just been released in the last couple of days that an attorney that worked for a firm that represented the Koch brothers wound up at Office of Management and Budget and then went into the Department of Justice, who was triangulating with Jenny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, to create the two largest, most important institutions in the situation as it related to try to create a legal standing, that there was questions about the 2020 election, okay, i.e. the big lie, which was all bullshit. There were plants. There were the Koch brothers that worked at the highest levels to do the shit on the inside. And who are the Kochs? Who are the fucking Kochs? They're billionaires that are in the fossil fuel industry and all sorts of other stuff, but what they're in the business of is making sure conservatives do what the fuck they tell them, first and foremost. And that's to get their goddamn way. And I will remind you that the Koch brothers, their father, Fred Koch, built, the reason they got their goddamn fortune to begin with was he built the entire mega infrastructure of oil and gas for Stalin, a communist, right? The king of all communism. If you hate communists, I'd say that he is an authoritarian dictator more than a communist. Like these guys, they call themselves libertarians, but what they are is just basically part of the corporate fascism that is undergirded by a criminal syndicate. And justice, as much as it can be, I don't know, it helps if you make a lot of money from suing somebody and it's publicly, everybody realizes that Alex Jones was in the wrong and he should never be able to lie about, the victims, but if it goes down for Alex Jones, I would like to say, why can't it go down for, there's there's not really different degrees. They're different stories. But why couldn't it go down for Tucker Carlson? Why couldn't it go down for Rachel Maddow? Why couldn't it go down for all of these assholes, Anderson Cooper? Because they are lying to your face every single day because they've got millions upon millions of dollars of infrastructure and resources to be able to go out and find the truth and tell the truth, but they don't. And I'll give you the final analogy of why this works this way. Okay? So if the Department of Justice wants to come on down on you for any crime that you might be associated with, the resources between you as an individual and the Department of Justice are monumental. It's like comparing the size of the earth to the volume and the scope of the size of the sun. They will destroy you if they want to because of the way it works, okay? Now imagine this. White shoe law firms, Wall Street, the power system that I'm talking about between Wall Street and the military industrial complex and the fossil fuel complex that basically undergirds the power of this country, they would be like comparing the sun to the largest star in the universe. In fact, let's take a quick look at what that is. Since I already went there online, I'll go ahead and do the same thing here. What's the largest star in the universe and how much bigger is it than the sun? Maybe you can find it faster than I can. So largest star in the universe. It's UY Scuddy. You could fit 5 billion suns inside UY Scuddy. Okay? That's what we're talking about in context. And quite frankly, I just demonstrated the brilliance of technology. You can get any answer you want. And here's the thing about technology versus all the lies and the obfuscation, the deception, and the misinformation and the disinformation that comes at us every day in so many different directions, paid for by these bastards that have complete control of our country. We can compete. I can compete with them if I can get to millions of people that believe what I'm saying. If you see The Con at www.thecon.tv, you will understand what they did. And I've got more, okay? If you go to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con and you like and subscribe and you share, you can get into a situation where we, the people, have to ferment a movement to overcome the madness. We've got to elevate the truth above lies. It's not just justice to 10 to 12 to 15 to 20 years later be able to A, frag a freaking terrorist that got 3,000 people 20 years ago, or B, get a guy that's been lying for 12 years to get $150 million into his InfoWars, by lying about the family members. That's not justice, man. We got to end the situation of allowing this insanity to happen. And the only way we can do that is if you really give a flying fuck about liberty and justice for all and truth and justice above all else. Because if nothing matters to you, you don't matter. For the rest of you, join us. Onwards and upwards.